We've seen what happens with the development of cell phone technology, which was deployed in Africa faster than any other technology ever in the history of humanity. You see small villages where they have no running water, where they have wood fires to cook with, there's no electricity. There's one little solar panel on the top of a mud hut, and that solar panel is not there for a light, it's there to charge a Nokia 1000 feature phone, because that phone gives them weather reports, and it gives them grain prices in the local market, and it connects them to the world. Now, what happens when that phone becomes a bank? Because with Bitcoin, it can be a bank. What happens when you connect 6.5 billion people to a global economy without any barriers of access? Bitcoin is not a currency. Bitcoin is the internet of money. And as a technology, it can bring economic inclusion and empowerment to billions of people in the world. I'll give you one example of a specific application that is going to fundamentally change the lives of more than 1 billion people within the next 5 to 10 years. Every day, an immigrant somewhere cashes their paycheck and stands in line to wire 50% of that paycheck back to their home country to feed an extended family, right? Here in the US, 60 million people have no bank accounts, and yet they cash their paychecks and send them abroad. Overall in the world, $515 billion are transmitted every year in the form of remittances, foreign remittances, from first world countries to 5 major destinations: Mexico, India, the Philippines, Indonesia, and China. And these 5 destinations, in some of these places, remittances form 20, 30, or 40% of the local economy. And sitting on top of that flow of $500 billion are companies like Western Union. And they take a 15% cut of every single one of these transactions out of the pockets of the poorest people in the world. Now, imagine what happens when one day one of these immigrants figures out that they can do the same thing with Bitcoin, not for 15%, not for 10%, not for 5%, but for 5 cents. Not a percentage, a flat fee. What happens when they can do that? Because they can, right now. We've seen a company start up that is handling remittances between the US and the Philippines. They're doing a few $1 million right now, but they're going to start growing. And there's $500 billion sitting behind that dam. And when you're an immigrant and you can change your financial future by not paying 15% to send money home, imagine what happens if every month, instead of sending $80 home, you send $100 home. That makes a difference. There's 1 billion people right now who have access to the internet and feature phones who could use Bitcoin as an international wire transfer service. So, to sum up, Bitcoin is the most exciting technology I have seen. I was around in 1989 on the internet as a young kid, and I saw that and I knew it was going to change the world, long before most people figured it out. And I told everyone around me, we're going to do shopping on this. We're going to do banking on this thing. And people's reaction was quite predictable. Yeah, Andreas, go do your homework. Clean up your room. And when I first saw Linux, I thought, man, this is going to change operating systems forever. IBM is going down. And everybody laughed at me. And when I saw the first web browser and the first website, and I thought, every single company in America is going to have a website within a decade. And everybody laughed at me. Well, let me tell you something. I don't know what's going to happen with Bitcoin, but I do know that the underlying invention, a system of digital currencies that has no banks, no governments, no central control, and is available for anyone to use without asking permission, it'll change the world. Thank you. So I think we have 10-15 minutes. I'd be happy to take questions from the audience. So anybody who has a question, just shout it out. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, actually, before you just give some background stories on Bitcoin and how it started. I'm sure it's easy to
How I got started with Bitcoin?
How Bitcoin in general started.
How Bitcoin got started? It goes back to the 70s, really. And in the 70s, a bunch of researchers invented a new form of cryptography called asymmetric cryptography that allowed you to have cryptography without sharing a secret. Diffie-Hellman, Ribas, Shamir, and Edelman, they invented in the late 70s a series of technologies that allowed you to do encryption and digital signatures. Digital signatures were a very interesting thing, and they allowed for the first time the concept of creating digital money. Because if you have digital signatures, then you can take a token, any kind of token, a number, and you can digitally sign it and say, this is special, this is being issued by a central authority or something like that, and it means money. So the idea of if we have digital signatures and we have digital tokens and we can build digital money, this will be pretty powerful technology, existed since the early 80s. And several attempts were made to create that. The big problem with having digital money is that, as you know, making a copy of something digital is not only possible and easy, the copy is a perfect copy of the original. There's no distinguishing one copy for another. So the problem with having digital money is that if you are given a digital dollar bill and you can make two of them, that represents a slight wrinkle in the overall scheme. So the way that was solved, and that's called the double spend problem, the way that was solved was to have a central clearinghouse, a system by which people could check if that dollar had been spent before and not allow it to be spent again. And the problem with that is that you have to put all of your trust in a central clearinghouse. And that central clearinghouse goes down, you have no network. And so digital money has been a topic of research for the last 35 years. Until 2008, no one had figured out how to break this challenge, how to solve the problem of creating a trusted clearinghouse without giving someone that trust. Essentially, it boils down to how do you build trust in a network of people who don't know each other without giving that control to someone in a central position. And the reason you don't want to do that is because if you give power to someone, it corrupts them. And power for money corrupts faster than any power there is. And if you give people power for money, they steal it. Again and again and again. I mean, this is a story as old as history itself. The Greeks figured this out 3,000 years ago. Lehman Brothers figured it out in 2008. So, in 2008, a researcher published a paper called a peer-to-peer digital cash system, Bitcoin. And that paper said, here's a new way of doing it, which involves competition. And the competition ensures that no one is the clearinghouse, but at the same time, everyone is the clearinghouse. And if you structure that competition in a specific way, just through simple mathematics, the system can scale and become robust, and no one can cheat, because as the system gets bigger and bigger, the amount of computing required to cheat is enormous. The electricity that costs is enormous. And if you can instead use that to get rewarded by the system, instead of cheating, which loses you all your money, then you rather play honest by the rules. And that sounds crazy. Today, there's an $8 billion economy running on it that has been constantly attacked for the last 5 years, and I guess it works. So not so crazy after all. So that started with that paper in 2008. And the system itself is a peer-to-peer technology, which is an open source software application based on a set of simple protocol rules and simple mathematical equations and algorithms. No one controls it. Everyone can see exactly how it works. And yeah, it's here. Yes?
Thank you for coming with this excellent
Thank you.
What did you talk about? We spoke a little bit about utility in developing countries. I wonder, and I think as many of us here are advocates, advocates, I wonder if you talk about whether it seems like it benefit us to temper our expectations of schools adoption in developing countries versus
I don't know what it means to temper our expectations when it comes to adoption. I think people are going to be surprised and will continue to be surprised by how fast Bitcoin spreads. First of all, I've been surprised through every technology I've seen mature rapidly. Every time I've seen a kind of earth-shattering, world-changing technology, and that started with my first computer, my first PC, my first modem, first internet connection, first website, and then Linux, and then Bitcoin. To me, those were a series of 6 epiphanies, and every time I had this, this is going to be amazing moment, and then I thought, it's going to take decades. And the biggest mistake I made every time was underestimating how fast a useful technology spreads. I didn't expect computers to spread this fast. I didn't expect the internet to spread this fast. I didn't expect Linux to spread this fast. Every time I was surprised, not by how broad it was, but by how fast the technology accelerated once it reached a level of awareness and consciousness. We have already crossed the tipping point for Bitcoin. Bitcoin is working at a scale no one imagined possible. It is now a global transnational currency. At its very basic, it is the most useful form of money for the internet invented. It's safe, it's fast, and it's cheap. It's transnational, it doesn't give a shit about borders, it just moves. And that creates enormous financial velocity and flexibility. I think while in the developing world it's going to have the most earth-shattering impact and implications, because it simultaneously takes money out of the hands of some of the most corrupt governments in the world and puts it in the hands of the people, and at the same time it connects everybody in one global currency that they can use for trade with the rest of the world. It's going to have the biggest impact there, but that's not where it's going to go fastest. I think you're going to be surprised at how fast it's going to accelerate, even in the developing world. Because the developing world is also much bigger than we realize here. The US is 5% of the world population. And the US has the world reserve currency, and that's a position one currency has. There's 193 other currencies. Of those, probably 100 are worth nothing. They're dirt. And they're incredibly corrupt and very difficult to trade, et cetera, et cetera. But there's another 100 in between that are these countries that are semi-developed or developed enough in terms of infrastructure, literacy, numeracy, technology capability, but at the same time have really difficult currency situations and very bad governance. I'll give you just a few examples. Buenos Aires, Argentina, I visited there in November of 2013. This is a country that in the last 15 years has had 2 major currency crises, and it is on the precipice of a major bond default that will completely trash their currency for the 3rd time. And in that country, they have lost everything for an entire generation, now almost 3 times. Every single time that happens, the government is able to shut the shutters, if you like, cordon off the country from a currency perspective, and take the entire population of Argentina hostage, and force them to continue to use a currency even as it turns to dust in their hands. What happens when they no longer have the ability to do that? So Argentina is one currency crisis away from a mass Bitcoin adoption event. And it's not going to be adopted by 100% of the population. It's going to be adopted by maybe 1% of the population. But 1% of the population of Argentina is going to bring maybe $2 billion into the economy. And is going to create a high enough density of users of Bitcoin in places like Buenos Aires that is going to change that economy dramatically. And then people look at that and they copy that example. Next time Cyprus happens, where the government goes in and confiscates money from people's bank accounts, they're going to opt out from that system. And this is going to continue happening in small places all around the world. So I think we're all going to be surprised by how fast Bitcoin takes off. In the developed world, it's going to take off primarily for shopping and e-commerce and getting around difficult forms of finance and capital flows. But there's also this vast in between where we are and where Zimbabwe is, for example. And there's 100 currencies in there that could benefit from Bitcoin. I think we're going to be surprised. Again, the big difference, the internet took 15 years to bloom into its full mainstream adoption. And it's still accelerating, by the way. But those 15 years also involved putting down infrastructure, copper wires, fiber optics, data centers, cell phone infrastructure, modems, PCs that were barely ahead of that game and spreading at the same time. With Bitcoin, all you need to do is download an app. That's the infrastructure. We don't need to lay any cables. We already got them. So not only is it going to spread much faster than the internet, it's actually going to accelerate the spread of the internet itself. Because now an internet device has an added layer of utility, being a bank. And that layer of utility is self-financing, which means it will pay for the internet connection. And that changes quite a few things on the internet too, when you can fund infrastructure. All right, let me take a couple more questions, sir.
Bitcoin exchange, the role that, well, hey, these guys suddenly lost all the money.
Yeah.
What's with Bitcoin exchanges? Are you saying we need to go beyond that?
So Bitcoin exchanges, right, Bitcoin exchanges are kind of the most centralized aspect of Bitcoin. Think of them as the on-ramps and off-ramps into and out of the Bitcoin economy. And when you're operating in an environment where you're frequently interacting with the rest of the economy, the exchanges are rather important. Since October of last year, I get paid in Bitcoin almost entirely. And I do most of my spending in Bitcoin almost entirely. So I have less and less and less interaction with exchanges. And so also I don't really pay attention to the price of Bitcoin as much as I used to because I buy things in Bitcoin. So exchanges are less important the more you operate within the Bitcoin economy. One of the things that people don't realize is that Bitcoin is not simply absorbing the US economy and converting things. So you could buy it with dollars now, you could buy it with Bitcoin. That's very, very small. What's much, much bigger is the possibility of creating a completely new economy and the economic activity that happens within. Let me give you a parallel. If I told you in 1997, if I asked you the question, how many fax and telephone lines will the internet replace? Now you look back at that question today, and you think that's a ridiculous question. That makes no sense whatsoever, because the whole point of the internet isn't replacing faxes. We're not enjoying the internet because now we can fax better. But if you looked at the conversation that was happening then, people were writing 30-page reports on whether AT&T's long-distance business and the fax machine business were threatened primarily by the internet, and counting how many offices and businesses were converting to email, and whether that would threaten the post office. Looking at Bitcoin as what it replaces e-commerce stores is missing the point. We're building completely new economic activity here. So what happens with these exchanges? They're centralized, they're at the edges of the network, and they're where Bitcoin touches traditional money. The slowest parts of traditional money, the most regulated parts of traditional money. For regulators, exchanges are the nail for which they have a really good hammer, so they hammer on them, because that's all they know. They can't touch Bitcoin itself, they can touch the exchanges. For crooks, the opportunity to find a centralized part of Bitcoin where people concentrate their money, which isn't under the control of the distributed algorithm, but is in the hands of one individual organization, is a tremendous opportunity. So the exchange failures you've seen are situations where people took their money off the Bitcoin network, gave them to an exchange, and gave them control over that money. What happens when you give someone control over your money? They steal it. It's the oldest story in the book. It's like, here, I've got a suitcase full of $100,000. Would you mind holding this for a few minutes? I'm just going to go get a cup of coffee. You will be extremely surprised if you come back and that suitcase is still there. That would be the exception. Most of the time, it won't be there when you come back. And so, exchanges are like that. If you give someone your Bitcoin keys and you say, here's my Bitcoin, could you hold on to it for a second? Yeah, don't be surprised if you come back and it's not there.
Where do you see decentralized exchanges going?
Excellent question. So we're beginning to see...
The problem of front running and high frequency trading you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, decentralized exchanges are gradually growing. They're not an easy problem to solve because you still need pools of liquidity and you still need ways to concentrate the non-Bitcoin currency. So even if you have a distributed Bitcoin exchange, you still need ways to exchange the non-Bitcoin. And that stuff tends to be hard to transfer. It tends to be hard to cross borders with it. It tends to be very controlled. It doesn't move very fast and it has a lot of fees. All of the things that Bitcoin solves. When you touch them with an exchange, you end up reintroducing all of those problems. So it's not easy to make decentralized exchanges. If you want to get Bitcoin, there are a couple of really good ways to get Bitcoin. Here's the number one way of getting Bitcoin if you're interested in this new currency and this new economy. Figure out a skill that you have and start charging Bitcoin for it. Find a product that you already make or sell and start charging Bitcoin for it. Find a service that you already sell and start charging Bitcoin for it. So the trick is not to buy Bitcoin. Earn Bitcoin. Through your work, through your labor, through your sweat and tears and pain and passion and enthusiasm and creativity and innovation. And that is what is pouring into Bitcoin. It's not venture capital money, it's not investors. It's the passion of people deciding that they're going to put their labor into this new currency and not let anyone take a cut of that.
What do you believe will happen first? Do you believe that a existing country will accept Bitcoin as their reserve or the Bitcoins themselves will become so large that they'll have to purpose and set up their own country, their own laws, their own...
What will happen first? Will a country adopt Bitcoin or will Bitcoin buy a country? That very question assumes the supremacy of the nation state. I have news for you. Bitcoin is the first post-national currency. It's going to change a lot more than banking. Bitcoin enables for the first time the sovereignty of nations to be expressed by individuals. That is an extremely powerful force. Bitcoin enables people to interact regardless of nation and despite borders, and that is an extremely powerful force. So the question needs to be rephrased. Which is the first nation to adopt Bitcoin? Well, I have news for you. Bitcoin is being adopted by the most populous nation, sovereign on the planet. Bitcoin is already being adopted by the most wealthy economy on the planet. And that is not China, and that is not the United States. That is the internet. The internet is a sovereign entity, an entity that crosses borders, an entity that I belong to, and so does an Egyptian blogger in the streets of Cairo, and so does a young kid in Indonesia. And the internet brings us together to collaborate based on common interest and common culture, a culture that transcends borders and transcends nations. And now we have our own currency. And that currency will actually make internet sovereignty more powerful. That currency means that the internet has its own economy. And that economy is already adopting Bitcoin faster than any nation state in the world, and is going to build an economy that is more powerful than any nation state in the world. And they can't shut down Bitcoin for exactly the same reason that they can't shut down the internet. So asking which country will take internet first is like asking how many fax machines the internet will replace. It doesn't matter. By the time this plays out, the concept of a national currency will be obsolete. The concept of sovereignty through currency will be obsolete. The concept of a traditional corporation registered in a specific locality is probably already obsolete. The concept of a bank will be obsolete. The concept of a checking account will be obsolete. The concept of a wire transfer will be obsolete. And we will be in a completely new environment where none of these concepts matter. It's not that we will replace them, it's that we will render them obsolete. All right, let's think about the question.
Oh, sorry. We don't answer already.
Oh, you already asked me.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, go ahead.
Listen.
I just want to know how you evaluate
The stability of Bitcoin as a currency.
Yeah.
Stability is not the main characteristic of Bitcoin. So think of the US dollar as the Titanic. And then next to it is this little inflatable zodiac that's Bitcoin. And we're on it. And it's bouncing in the waves, right? And it's going up and down and shaking all over the place. But it can turn really fast. And it can travel really fast. And it didn't just hit an iceberg. So while the Titanic is beautifully stable and majestic, it's also sinking. Whereas the little Bitcoin zodiac is bouncing all over the place, but it can outmaneuver everything out there. Bitcoin is not about stability, especially when compared to traditional currencies. Bitcoin's volatility is heading primarily in one direction, and that's increased value. And it's going to remain volatile, probably for a decade. Very, very volatile. And that's because the liquidity pool of $8 billion in a $140 trillion world economy is like a kiddie swimming pool next to the Pacific Ocean. If you get the biggest person you know to jump into the Pacific Ocean, they're not going to make a splash. If they jump into the kiddie pool, everyone gets wet. So Bitcoin right now, anytime something happens, big splash, big waves, lots of volatility, everything sloshes around for a while. But it's growing, and as it grows, it's going to get more stable and less volatile. But stability is not a sign of health. Stability and lack of volatility is not a sign of a healthy economy. In fact, if anything, right now, today, for example, if you look at the financial measures, VIX, which is the volatility index of the S&P 500 stock market, it is at the lowest point it's been in, I think, 14 years. Now, that means one of two things. We have the healthiest economy of the last 2 decades, or we're all about to go to hell in a handbasket. I vote for the second. Right? Something is very, very, very wrong when the stock market is soaring and stable as a rock and the economy is collapsing all around it. And we all know that's the case. Volatility is not the same as instability. Economic systems that do not express movement, that appear to be rock solid but are artificially kept that way, are in fact extremely fragile. Bitcoin is incredibly dynamic, incredibly volatile, but it's also anti-fragile. It dynamically adjusts to shocks. And that's why, despite all of the claims to the contrary, and all of the obituaries written for Bitcoin, every 3 months, someone predicts, with great glee, lots of gloating, lots of schadenfreude, that Bitcoin is about to die. I'm making a collection of those articles. I'm going to keep them around so I can make maybe a special website a decade from now. Put it alongside the quotes of the mayor of Paris, who said that electricity was a passing fad. Bitcoin isn't going anywhere. Volatility is nothing to be feared. What you need to do is manage volatility. So if you receive Bitcoin from someone and you intend to use that Bitcoin to spend on something in dollars, then you exchange it as soon as you receive it. A lot of merchants do that. They'll price in dollars, get paid in Bitcoin, convert it the same day, and there are services that will do that for you. And then volatility disappears, you don't need to worry about it. And to close on that particular question, I asked someone in Argentina about that. I said, are you worried about Bitcoin volatility? And he said, Andreas, we have peso volatility. And peso volatility goes like this. And Bitcoin volatility goes like that. I'd rather be going that way. All right. I think that's all the time we had today. Again, thank you so much for coming.